On September 3, 1946, President Harry S. Truman signed a secret directive. It authorized the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency to bring German scientists to American soil under military contracts. The operation was called Paperclip. The public learned fragments in December 1946. They were told it was about rocket technology. They were told it was about beating the Soviets. They were told the scientists were apolitical experts whose knowledge would safeguard American security. More than 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians relocated to the United States between 1945 and 1959. Many became instrumental in the space program and military development during the Cold War. Wernher von Braun became a household name. His rockets took Americans to the moon, but the official narrative concealed something darker. In March 1945, inside a men's restroom at Bonn University, a Polish laboratory technician made a discovery. Pieces of paper were stuffed in a toilet. He pulled them out. It was the Osenberg List. Werner Osenberg, an engineer-scientist, had compiled the names of German scientists and technicians deemed politically reliable by the Nazi government. The list was intended to recall intellectual resources for military research. British MI6 received it and transmitted the intelligence to the United States. Major Robert B. Staver of the U.S. Army Ordnance Corps used the Osenberg List to compile his own roster of targets. Wernher von Braun's name was at the top. By May 1945, American special agents from the Counterintelligence Corps were hunting these men. The mission was twofold: secure their knowledge and deny it to the Soviet Union. President Truman's September 1946 directive contained explicit language. No one could be brought to the United States who had been a member of the Nazi Party and more than a nominal participant in its activities, or an active supporter of Nazism or militarism. The Joint Chiefs of Staff had requested 1,000 German scientists under temporary military custody. Truman agreed, but only under those conditions. A review panel consisting of representatives from the Departments of Justice and State was assigned to evaluate each scientist's background. Their job was to enforce the President's order. They began reviewing dossiers. They found problems immediately. Security investigations conducted by the military disclosed a disturbing fact. And the majority of German scientists were members of either the Nazi Party or one or more of its affiliated organizations. The review panel rejected several candidates based on their Nazi pasts. The Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency did not accept this. The JIOA director sent a wire to the Director of Intelligence at U.S. European Command. He requested that revised security reports be prepared. The files were rewritten. Nazi Party membership was described as nominal. SS ranks disappeared from records. References to human experimentation and slave labor were excised. This was not an oversight. It was deliberate, coordinated policy designed to circumvent U.S. immigration law and presidential directive. The scientists were recast as apolitical technocrats. Their expertise was presented as a neutral resource to be harvested. Samuel Klaus, a State Department attorney, objected strenuously. He pointed out that the United States was giving Nazis opportunities for American citizenship while denying that same chance to Holocaust refugees. His protests were ignored. Klaus found himself increasingly marginalized. The JIOA worked independently of the State Department, the President, and the White House. They did what they wanted. The Office of Military Government, United States, initially prepared a security report on Wernher von Braun. It stated he was an SS officer and a Nazi Party member, a security threat. The JIOA version that reached State Department reviewers softened this assessment. It said he may have been an SS officer and that his political inclinations were inward. The truth was unambiguous. Von Braun held the rank of SS Sturmbannführer, equivalent to major. He accepted this rank in 1940 and wore the uniform. He was also a member of the Nazi Party. These were not honorary titles forced upon him. They were active choices that integrated him into the coercive apparatus of the Nazi state. To achieve and maintain his position as technical director of the V-2 rocket program required political reliability. The Nazi government did not entrust strategic weapons programs to the politically unreliable. More critically, his work was directly linked to enslaved labor and mass death. In 1943, the Royal Air Force bombed the rocket research facility at Peenemünde. Production was halted. The Nazi regime decided to move V-2 rocket production underground. The result was the Mittelbau factory, a massive network of tunnels dug into the Kohnstein mountain. The associated concentration camp was called Mittelbau-Dora. More than 60,000 prisoners passed through Dora between August 1943 and March 1945. Slave laborers from Buchenwald concentration camp were brought to extend the tunnels. They built 6,000 V-2 rockets. They experienced squalid housing, starvation diets, and draconian discipline with frequent executions. The conditions were designed to extract maximum labor before death. Approximately 20,000 died in the tunnels. More prisoners died building the V-2 than were killed by the weapon itself. Von Braun's complicity was functional, not distant. Correspondence and wartime documents place him at the Mittelwerk and Dora on multiple occasions. A memo from him, dated August 15, 1944, requests the allocation of more skilled prisoner laborers from the SS. He specifically mentioned a need for turret lathe operators. He knew they were prisoners, he knew the conditions, he requested more. Arthur Rudolph was the operations director for V-2 production at Mittelwerk. He was responsible for meeting relentless production quotas. His presence and authority in the tunnel system were direct and daily. Survivor testimonies from the Dora war crimes trial describe Rudolph as a demanding manager who was fully aware he was overseeing slave labor. He worked in concert with SS officers to discipline and manage the prisoner workforce. His file was cleansed. His active role in the exploitation of slave labor was removed from the dossier presented to the State Department. He came to America. He became a NASA executive. He worked closely with von Braun on the Saturn V rocket that carried Apollo astronauts to the Moon. He received awards and recognition. For decades, his past remained concealed. Dr. Hubertus Strughold became known in the United States as the father of space medicine. He was brought to America under Operation Paperclip and worked at the Aero Medical Center. His credentials were impeccable, according to his sanitized file. In October 1942, he attended a medical conference in Nuremberg. SS physician Sigmund Rascher delivered a presentation detailing freezing experiments conducted on inmates at Dachau concentration camp. Strughold was in the audience. Luftwaffe Surgeon General Erich Hipke was also present. Between February 1942 and the summer of that year, Rascher and Luftwaffe aviation scientists collaborated on a series of aeromedical experiments. Inmates from Dachau, mostly Polish and Soviet POWs, served as human test subjects. They were locked inside portable pressure chambers. The interior air pressure was altered to simulate the effects of free-falling from high altitude without oxygen. Of the 200 test subjects, 80 were killed by the tests outright. The remainder were subsequently executed by the SS. Other experiments involved submerging prisoners in tanks of freezing water for hours. They were then immersed in hot, sometimes boiling, water to simulate warming, often with fatal results. Rascher presented these findings to the conference Strughold attended. In 2004, the Historical Committee of the German Society of Air and Space Medicine conducted an investigation. They uncovered evidence of oxygen deprivation experiments carried out by Strughold's Institute for Aviation Medicine in 1943. 6 epileptic children between the ages of 11 and 13 were taken from the Nazis' Brandenburg Euthanasia Center to Strughold's Berlin laboratory. They were placed in vacuum chambers to induce epileptic seizures. The purpose was to simulate the effects of high-altitude sicknesses such as hypoxia. This information was not in his American file. The expansion of Operation Paperclip created a culture where deceit flourished. The habitual concealment of facts became commonplace. The JIOA used vague language to obscure the scientists' past connections to the Nazi regime. They were characterized as distinguished experts from Germany. The operation was portrayed as a tactic to retain their expertise exclusively for the United States. There was no reference to their past affiliations with the Nazi regime or involvement in war crimes. The initiative's real intent was masked by rhetoric that capitalized on Cold War fears. National security became the justification for moral compromise. Captain Bosque Enwev, director of the JIOA, stated the case bluntly in an April 27, 1948 memo to the Pentagon's Director of Intelligence. The scientists' technical value outweighed their past. The Soviet threat required their recruitment. The American public was not consulted. Congress was not fully informed. The program continued to expand. By the late 1940s, what began as a list of a few hundred names had grown into a program spanning dozens of scientific disciplines. More than 1,600 specialists eventually came to America. The program was valued at $10 billion in patents and industrial processes. The cost was measured differently by those who died in the tunnels. Congressional hearings in 1977 and 1978 put the government's record in the spotlight. 2 Government Accountability Office studies were published. They showed that several federal agencies had employed Nazi suspects through programs such as Operation Paperclip. The hearings concluded that American military leaders had made morally bankrupt decisions on the grounds of national security. Investigative journalism in the 1970s led to increased scrutiny. Documents declassified in the 1970s revealed the shocking extent of the deception. Security dossiers had been systematically rewritten to remove damning information. In 1979, the Justice Department opened the Office of Special Investigations. Its mission was to find and bring to justice any Nazi war criminals living in the United States. The OSI began reinvestigating individuals brought over under Operation Paperclip. Arthur Rudolph was confronted with evidence from his own past. Faced with the prospect of denaturalization and a public trial, he signed an agreement in 1984 to leave the United States voluntarily and renounce his citizenship. He was not prosecuted. He was allowed to leave quietly. The U.S. government, having once sanitized his record to bring him in, now used that same record to expel him. This occurred only after his technological utility had been exhausted. While the OSI did not bring to trial any of the scientists or engineers involved in Operation Paperclip, its investigations exposed the original deception. In October 1998, President Bill Clinton signed into law the Nazi War Crimes Disclosure Act. It required the U.S. government to locate, declassify, and release in their entirety, with few exceptions, remaining classified records about war crimes committed by Nazi Germany and its allies. The President established an interagency working group to oversee its implementation. The primary mission was to identify still classified records and recommend their declassification. By the fall of 1999, the IWG expected to have nearly 300,000 pages declassified. Over 126,000 pages were declassified by that point. These records became available for public examination at the National Archives in College Park. The documents confirmed what investigators had suspected. The JIOA had systematically falsified security reports. Presidential directives had been circumvented. Immigration law had been violated. The ethical contradictions of Operation Paperclip were not buried in the past. They had a long and active half-life. The full scope of Operation Paperclip remains incompletely documented, not all files have been declassified, not all participants have been identified. The program brought over more than 1,600 individuals and their families. Many lived ordinary American lives. Some became celebrated figures in science and engineering. Others remained obscure. The question of accountability was never fully resolved. Arthur Rudolph was the only high-profile paperclip scientist to face consequences. He was not prosecuted. He was allowed to leave. Wernher von Braun died in 1977, honored and respected. Hubertus Strughold died in 1986, his awards and honors intact. The victims of Mittelbau-Dora received no restitution from the American government. The 20,000 who died in the tunnels were not acknowledged in the official histories of the space program. The moral cost of Operation Paperclip was externalized. The benefits were claimed by the United States. The question remains, what else was concealed in the name of national security? What other compromises were made? Who else was brought to America under false pretenses? The declassified documents provide answers to some questions. They raise others that may never be answered. The hidden truth about Operation Paperclip is not just that Nazi scientists were recruited. It is that the American government systematically deceived its own citizens, violated its own laws, and protected individuals complicit in mass murder. All in the name of winning the Cold War. The rockets that took Americans to the moon were built on knowledge extracted from the tunnels of Mittelbau-Dora. The cost was paid by those who did not survive to see it.